Do you have ideas of how we practically build systems that create a resilient society?
Could we actually condition more social virtue, more civic virtue, more orientation towards dialectical synthesis, more empathy, more rationality widely? Yes. Would that lead to better capacity for something like participatory governance, democracy or republic, or some kind of participatory governance? Yes. Is it necessary for it, actually? Yes. Let's not take GDP or GDP per capita as the metric we want to optimize for, because GDP goes up during war and it goes up with more healthcare spending from sicker people and various things that we wouldn't say correlate to quality of life. What would the metrics for a good civilization be? If I had to pick a set of metrics, what would the best ones be if I was going to optimize for those? And then really try to run the thought experiment more deeply and say, okay, so what happens if we optimize for that? Try to think through the first and second and third order effects of what happens that's positive, and then also say what negative things can happen from optimizing that. When we start saying, can we make tech where we're measuring for the things that it produces beyond just the measure of GDP or whatever particular measures look like the revenue generation or profit generation of my business, are all the meaningful things measurable? And what are the right measures? And what are the externalities of optimizing for that measurement set? What meaningful things aren't included in that measurement set that might have their own externalities? These are some of the questions we actually have to take seriously.
Yeah, and I think they're answerable questions, right?
Progressively better, not perfect. Progressively better, not perfect. Progressively better, not perfect. I can tell you what some of my favorite metrics are, because I thought about this a lot. I don't think there is a metric, a right one. Progressively better, not perfect. I think that every metric by itself, without this thing we talked about of the continuous improvement, becomes a paperclip maximizer. I think that's what the idea of false idol means in terms of the model of reality not being reality. Then my sacred relationship is to reality itself, which also binds me to the unknown forever. To the known, but also to the unknown. And there's a sense of sacredness connected to the unknown that creates an epistemic humility that is always seeking not just to optimize the thing I know, but to learn new stuff and to be open to perceive reality directly. So my model never becomes sacred. My model's useful.
So the model can't be the false idol.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this is why the first verse of the Tao Te Ching is the Tao that is nameable is not the eternal Tao. The naming then can become the source of the 10,000 things that if you get too carried away with it can actually obscure you from paying attention to reality beyond in the models. One metric that I like to just as a thought experiment to consider is healthy human bonding. Say we were in a tribal type setting. My positive emotional states and your positive emotional states would most of the time be correlated, your negative emotional states and mine. And so you start laughing, I start laughing, you start crying, my eyes might tear up. And we would call that the compassion-compersion axis. So compassion is when you're feeling something negative, I feel some pain, I feel some empathy, something in relationship. Compersion is when you do well, I'm stoked for you. The fact that it's such an uncommon word in English is actually a problem culturally.
Because I feel that often, and I think that's a really good feeling to feel and maximize for, actually. Yeah.
That's actually the metric I'm going to say.
Oh, wow.
Is the compassion-compersion axis is the thing I would optimize for. Now, there is a state where my emotional states and your emotional states are just totally decoupled. And that is like sociopathy. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't care if I do, or for you to do well or whatever. But there's a worse state, and it's extremely common, which is where they're inversely coupled, where my positive emotions correspond to your negative ones and vice versa. And that is I would call it the jealousy sadism axis. The jealousy axis is when you're doing really well, I feel something bad. I feel taken away from, less than, upset, envious, whatever. And that's so common. But I think of it as kind of a low-grade psychopathology that we've just normalized. The idea that I'm actually upset at the happiness or fulfillment or success of another is like a profoundly fucked up thing. No, we shouldn't shame it and repress it so it gets worse. We should study it. Where does it come from? And it comes from our own insecurities and stuff. But then the next part that everybody knows is really fucked up is just on the same axis. It's the same inverted, which is, so the jealousy or the envy is the I feel badly when you're doing well. The sadism side is I actually feel good when you lose. Or when you're in pain, I feel some happiness that's associated. And you can see when someone feels jealous, sometimes they feel jealous with a partner and then they feel they want that partner to get it. Revenge comes up or something. So sadism is really like jealousy is one step on the path to sadism from the healthy compassion compersion axis. So I would like to see a society that is that is conditioning sadism and jealousy inversely, right? The lower that amount and the more the compassion compersion. And if I had to summarize that very simply, I would say it would optimize for compersion. Which is, because notice, that's not just saying love for you, where I might be self-sacrificing and miserable and I love people, but I kill myself. Which I don't think anybody thinks is a great idea. Or happiness, where I might be sociopathically happy, where I'm causing problems all over the place, or even sadistically happy. But it's a coupling, right? That I'm actually feeling happiness in relationship to yours, and even in causal relationship, where my own agentic desire to be happy wants to support you too. I mean, I know you ask your guests about the meaning of life, because ultimately when you're saying what is a desirable civilization, you can't answer that without answering what is a meaningful human life, and to say what is a good civilization, because it's going to be in relationship to that.
A more concrete version of that question is what is a better world? What is the kind of world we're trying to create? Really? Have you really thought about the kind
I'll
of
give you
world
some
create?
kind of simple answers to that are meaningful to me. But let me do the societal indices first, because they're fun.
Yes.
One index that I find very interesting is the inverse correlation of addiction within the society. The more a society produces addiction within the people in it, the less healthy I think the society is as a pretty fundamental metric. And so the more the individuals feel that there are less compulsive things in compelling them to behave in ways that are destructive to their own values. And insofar as a civilization is conditioning and influencing the individuals within it, the inverse of addiction.
Broadly defined.
Correct.
Addiction.
Compulsive behavior that is destructive towards things that we value.
Yeah.
I think that's a very
really
interesting one to think
That's
about.
a really interesting one, yeah.
And this is then also where comfort and addiction start to get very close. And the ability to go in the other direction from addiction is the ability to be exposed to hypernormal stimuli and not go down the path of desensitizing to other stimuli and needing that hypernormal stimuli, which does involve a kind of hormesis. This concept of hormesis, that it's actually stressing an adaptive system that increases its adaptive capacity, and that there's something that the happiness of a system has something to do with its adaptive capacity, its overall resilience, health, well-being, which requires a decent bit of discomfort. And yet in the presence of the comfort solution, it's very hard to not choose it. And then as you're choosing it regularly, to actually down-regulate your overall adaptive capacity. I do think the civilization of the future has to create something like ritualized discomfort. And
Ritualized discomfort.
yeah.
Ritualized discomfort.
Yeah.
Ritualized discomfort.
Yeah.
Ritualized discomfort.
Yeah. To make beings that are resilient and strong, they have to overcome some things. To make beings that can control their own mind and fear, they have to face some fears. But we don't want to put everybody in war or real trauma. So how do we get the benefits of the stealing of character and the resilience and the whatever that happened from the difficulty without traumatizing people? A certain kind of ritualized discomfort that not only has us overcome something by ourselves, but overcome it together with each other, where nobody bails when it gets hard because the other people are there. So it's both a resilience of the individuals and a resilience of the bonding. So I think we'll keep getting more and more comfortable stuff, but we have to also develop resilience in the presence of that for the anti-addiction direction and the fullness of character and the trustworthiness to others. And this is when I said the model of reality isn't reality. when you make a set of metrics, say we're going to optimize for this, whatever reality is that is not included in those metrics can be the areas where harm occurs, which is why I would say that wisdom is something like the discernment that leads to right choices beyond what metrics-based optimization would offer.
Yeah, but another way to say that is wisdom is constantly expanding and evolving set of metrics. So
which means that there is something in you that is recognizing a new metric that's important that isn't part of that metric set. So there's a certain kind of connection, discernment, awareness. Now, I do not think this should be imposed by states. I think it should emerge from cultures.
From the people, by the people, for the people.
And I think the cultures are developing people that understand the value of it. So there is both a cultural cohesion to it, but there's also a voluntarism because the people value the thing that is being developed. They understand it.
And that's where it's conditioning. It's conditioning some of these values. And
conditioning is a bad word because we like our idea of sovereignty, but when we recognize the language that we speak and the words that we think in and the patterns of thought built into that language and the aesthetics that we like, and so much is conditioned in us just based on where we're born, you can't not condition people. So all you can do is take more responsibility for what the conditioning factors are, and then you have to think about this question of what is a meaningful human life, because we're, unlike the other animals born into environment that they're genetically adapted for, we're building new environments that we were not adapted for, and then we're becoming affected by those. So then we have to say, well, what kinds of environments, digital environments, physical environments, social environments, would we want to create that would develop the healthiest, happiest, most moral, noble, meaningful people? And what are even those sets of things that matter? So you end up getting deep existential consideration at the heart of civilization design when you start to realize how powerful we're becoming and how much what we're building it in service towards matters.
Virtualized discomfort.
Yeah.
Daddy dead. Fuck.